You're watching Mr. 13 O'Clock, where the lights flicker, the air grows cold, and every story is more than just a rumor. Today, we step into the silence of forgotten places, peeling walls, rusted doors, and shadows that never left. These are 13 creepy, true stories from people who dared to explore abandoned buildings and found something was still waiting inside. If you're into the eerie and unexplained, hit subscribe. We've got darkness waiting for you every week. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? The Whispering Isle. There's a sound most students at Whitlock University knew well. The soft shuffle of footsteps between the ancient wooden shelves of Holloway Library. But for Marin, a junior working late on her thesis, there was another sound, one that didn't belong. It started with her name, whispered faintly, carried through the musty air like dust stirred from old pages. At first, she assumed it was someone playing a prank. Holloway was known for its strange acoustics. The architecture was old, Gothic, layered with forgotten corners and sealed-off wings no longer in use. But as the nights wore on and the whispers grew clearer, the rational explanations began to fall apart. Marin had always studied on the third floor. It was quiet, barely populated after sundown, and she liked the solitude. Her table faced the closed-off corridor labeled West Archive, restricted. A chain across the entrance hung limp with a faded sign that simply read, Staff only, structural risk. But behind it, she swore she saw light sometimes. Not steady like a bulb, but flickering, like candlelight, or maybe the weak pulse of something deeper. The first time she truly heard it, her name, spoken clearly, she froze. Not out of fear exactly, more like recognition. Like something in the whisper struck a note she couldn't place, but instinctively responded to. Marin, come here. She didn't tell anyone at first. What could she say? That a sealed wing of the library was calling to her? That the voice sounded eerily familiar? One night, curiosity chipped away at hesitation. She waited until the library was near empty, checked to make sure no staff were around, and crossed the chain. The corridor was darker than she expected, the overhead lights dead, and the air had that suffocating stillness of a place long undisturbed. The shelves here were taller, older. Labels were handwritten in fading ink. The books looked fragile, with pages like brittle skin. As she moved deeper in, the temperature dropped sharply. And then she heard it again. Marin, you left us. She turned fast. No one, just rows of dust-heavy shelves and a silence that pressed against her skull. The voice was behind her, yet inside her. She kept walking. At the very end of the corridor, she found a door. No label, just a tarnished brass knob and a keyhole that looked centuries old. The moment her hand touched it, her ears rang. A low, droning hum filled her head, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw a face in the reflection of the knob. Not hers, something that smiled without lips. She backed away, fussed, ran back down the corridor, breath shallow, skin cold. She didn't stop until she was back at her study table, the lights buzzing weakly above her, the chain swinging ever so slightly behind her, as if disturbed by a breeze that hadn't been there. The next day, she asked a librarian about the West Archive. The woman stiffened, said it had been closed since the 80s due to foundation issues, that no one had gone in for decades. When Marin asked about the books, the woman hesitated, then said, There are no books in there anymore. But that wasn't true. Marin had seen them, rows of them. That night, she returned. Something pulled her. This time, she brought her phone. But the moment she stepped past the chain, her signal dropped. The flashlight app flickered, then died completely. She navigated by memory back to the door. It was open. Inside was a reading room, oval-shaped, lined with shelves curved like ribs. A table sat in the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs. And on the table, laid perfectly flat, was a single open book. The pages were blank, except for one word. Marin. She flipped the page. Another word. Return. Another ode. And then, blood. The room grew colder. Shadows crawled up the walls, though nothing moved. And suddenly, around her, the whispers returned. But they weren't all saying her name now. They were naming others. Names she'd never heard, but she could feel them. like they belonged somewhere buried in her memory. She turned to leave, but the door was gone. She was trapped. The shelves began to hum, low and resonant, like a swarm of insects breathing in unison. And then a voice, deeper than the others, layered with something inhuman, spoke from nowhere and everywhere at once. You came back. The debt remains. Marin doesn't remember how she got out. She woke up slumped against her usual study table. The library was empty. Lights off. Her phone dead. She tried telling a friend. They joked about stress and deadlines. But when she went to show them the West Archive, the corridor was bricked up, literally sealed, like it had never been there. No chain, no sign, just a solid wall where the hallway had been. Her grades began to slip. Her sleep was restless. The voices didn't stop. Weeks later, she returned to Holloway at night, wandering aimlessly. When a janitor found her standing in front of the blank wall, hands outstretched as if trying to feel something that wasn't there, he asked if she needed help. She only whispered, "I still hear them." After that, she stopped coming to campus. Some say she dropped out. Others claim she transferred. But here's the strange part. In the catalog of the Holloway Library, under the West Archive's obsolete system, there's still an active record. It lists only one entry. A book with no author, no title, no call number. Its location reads, Whispering Isle, reserved. And the borrower? Still checked out. Name, Marinelle ______. Due date, never. They say libraries are where stories live forever. But sometimes it's not the books that hold the darkest secrets, it's what's hidden between the records. This story begins in 2011 in a quiet, ivy-covered university on the East Coast. One of those institutions where the library is older than the town itself. Nathan, a 26-year-old archival assistant, was hired to help digitize the university's microfilm collection, a tedious job, mostly involving outdated newspapers, property records, and local obituaries from decades past. Most reels were dusty, their labels faded, the contents forgotten. But deep in a locked drawer marked pending, Nathan found one reel that hadn't been cataloged. Its label had no title, just a date, March 3rd, 1984. Curious, Nathan loaded the reel into the microfilm reader. What he saw wasn't just odd, it was impossible. The first few frames looked like a normal local paper. Obituaries, a house fire, a car crash. But the names didn't match anything in the university's historical database. He tried cross-referencing, but no results came up. The names didn't exist. At least, not yet. 2 days later, Nathan was on his lunch break, scrolling through a local news app when he froze. A headline caught his eye. Fatal house fire claims family of 4 in Brookridge. It was the same street name, the same number, the same surname he'd seen on the microfilm 2 days earlier. He rushed back to the archive, his hands trembling as he reloaded the reel. The next few frames were darker, more deteriorated, but still readable. Another obituary, a drowning, a freak accident on a hiking trail, all dated ahead, some only by days. Nathan's stomach dropped. These weren't old records, they were predictions, and they were coming true. He tried telling his supervisor, Elaine, a stern, skeptical woman who'd worked in a library for over 30 years. She brushed it off. Probably a prank reel someone made for Halloween. People donate weird stuff all the time. But something in her eyes flickered, as if she recognized what he was talking about. That night, Nathan stayed late, alone in the archive. He advanced the reel further, carefully recording the obituaries with his phone. He didn't know why he kept watching. Morbid curiosity, maybe, but the further he went, the stranger the deaths became. One obituary described a psychological episode that led a college professor to throw himself from the library's 5th floor. Another mentioned an elevator malfunction that crushed a janitor in the East Wing. And another listed his name. Nathan Graham, age 26, died on March 17th. Cause: unexplained internal bleeding. That date was exactly 9 days away. At first, he thought it was a sick coincidence. Maybe someone was targeting him. He checked the reel again. There it was, frame 184, his own obituary sandwiched between 2 others. Same name, same face. He zoomed in. The photo was one he had taken last summer, pulled from his faculty ID. His breath hitched. How could this thing know? It didn't feel like a prank anymore. It felt like a warning. In the following days, Nathan spiraled. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. He showed the film to a few colleagues, but every single time, the frame with his obituary would be gone. It skipped right over it. Maybe you imagined it, one said, laughing nervously. You've been down in the archives too long, man. But Nathan knew what he saw. On March 15th, with 2 days left, Nathan decided to burn the reel. He sneaked it out, wrapped in a coat, and drove to a nearby campground. He threw the film into a fire pit and watched the plastic melt. It screamed as it burned, an awful, chemical shriek like melting bone. He thought it was over. But back at the library, it returned. Elaine handed it to him in a manila envelope the next morning. Someone left this in my mailbox. It belongs to you now. Same reel, same date. But now the label read, "Final copy. No further edits." Nathan didn't go home that night. He sat in the library surveillance room, drinking cold coffee and scanning every hallway on the monitors. Every time he blinked, he thought he saw shadows moving in the corners. Long figures standing between shelves, waiting, watching. Not ghosts, exactly, but something older, something aware. At 2:17 a.m., all the monitors cut to static, except one. It showed the microfilm reader room. The reel was spinning by itself. Frame after frame scrolled past, too fast to read. Then it stopped, and on the screen was one still image. Nathan, sitting exactly where he was right now. Blood trailing from his nose. Eyes empty, lifeless. He backed away from the screen and ran. He left the university the next morning, never returned any calls, and abandoned the job. His friends say he moved out west. Others say he checked into a clinic. But 6 months later, the library received a small, padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a USB drive. It contained a high-resolution scan of the same microfilm reel, now fully digitized. Frame 184, the one with Nathan's death, had been replaced. This time, it was a different name. Elaine Madix, age 62, died October 12th. Cause, exposure to a rare, fast-moving blood cancer. She died 6 days later. No one has seen the original microfilm since. But the digital copy? It's still archived under restricted media in the library database. And every so often, a new frame appears. One that no one remembers uploading. One that shows a new face, someone who visited recently. Someone whose time is running out. They're watching from everywhere. Subscribe before it's too late. And tell me, where are you watching from? The library was old, older than the town itself, some said. Brick and mortar, yes, but it had a strange stillness, like it had been poured out of colder time. No matter the hour, the place smelled like aging paper and worn leather. Its reading room, tall and shadowed, felt like a chapel. Dust floated in the air like faded memories. Derek had taken a night guard job, thinking it'd be easy. No crowds, no real movement, just a few patrols, a flashlight, and maybe a podcast or two to pass the time. And for the first few weeks, it was exactly that, until he noticed the man. It was around 2:17 a.m. the first time he saw him. Derek always remembered the time. The man sat in the far end of the reading room, under one of the hanging brass lamps, wearing an old brown coat buttoned up to the neck. His head was bent low, reading a large, cloth-bound book. Derek figured he was a professor who'd stayed late. "Sir, the library's closed," Derek called from the doorway. No answer. He stepped in, the rubber soles of his boots thudding softly across the marble floor. "Sir." When he got closer, he froze. The book the man was reading was blank. Page after page, nothing. The man didn't look up, didn't even blink. Derek backed out slowly, unsure what he'd just seen. He checked the sign-in logs. No one had stayed late. No name matched. Nothing. The next night, the man was back. Same seat, same coat, same blank book. 2:17 nachts. This time, Derek didn't approach. He stood just outside the reading room, watching from behind the glass door. And after a few minutes, he realized the man wasn't reading. He was staring. Not at the book, but through it, past it. as if his eyes were fixed on something behind the pages or inside them. Every night, like clockwork, the man appeared. Never early, never late. Always 2:17. Always the same seat. Always the same blank book. Derek stopped reporting it. Who would believe him? One night, trying to prove he wasn't imagining things, Derek brought his phone and snapped a picture. But when he looked at the photo, the man wasn't there. The lamp was on. The book was open. But the chair was empty. And yet Derek had seen him, with his own eyes. The silence of the reading room started to feel heavy, like something was reading, not the books, but him. Then came the scratching. It began faint, like a pencil dragging across parchment. Not constant, but rhythmic, coming from inside the walls, behind the shelves, beneath the floor. Some nights it echoed so loud through the reading room, Derek had to leave. He asked around discreetly. An older librarian told him that, decades ago, the reading room had been part of the original building before renovations. A scholar named Alan Muir used to spend his nights researching there. Every night, same chair, same book, until he died. He'd collapsed in that very seat in 1963. Heart failure, supposedly. But the book he died reading, it wasn't from the library. It wasn't from anywhere. No title, no author. Just a cover with worn velvet and yellowed pages inside. Completely blank. They said the coroner noted his eyes were wide open, pupils fully dilated, as if he'd seen something right before the end. The book had vanished after the body was removed. But Derek knew it hadn't gone far. He stopped sleeping well. Shadows lingered longer than they should. One night, he woke up at home, drenched in sweat, and found a note tucked under his pillow. It read, "I never left the reading room." The next shift, he nearly didn't go in. But some part of him, curiosity, maybe fear, pulled him back. Midnight passed uneventfully. At 2:16, Derek stood outside the reading room door. He checked his watch again. 2:17. The man was already there. Except this time, he was looking up, right at him, eyes locked, still unmoving, still unreadable. But he was watching. Derek opened the door slowly, hand trembling on the handle. The room was colder than usual. His breath came out in white mist. He walked in, one step then another, and then the lamp above the man flickered. The man raised a hand and gestured to the empty seat across from him. Derek wanted to run. Every part of his body screamed to. But he didn't. He sat. The book slid toward him across the polished wood table, gently, but with purpose. Derek stared at it. Same velvet cover. No title. No markings. He opened it. For a moment, nothing. Just more blank pages. But then something began to appear. Words. Faint. Fading in like smoke, rising from ash. But they weren't written. They were etched. Like someone had scraped them into the paper from the other side. It was his name, over and over. Derek, Derek, Derek. In smaller lines between the names were sentences. You are here now. You look too long. The eyes see backward. He read your name long ago. Derek slammed the book shut and bolted. The man never moved, never spoke, just sat, frozen in that chair, one hand still resting on the book's edge. Derek quit the next day. Told no one why. He didn't need to. They'd seen the change in him. His eyes tired and wide. Like he hadn't stopped reading something only he could see. But every so often, he dreams he's back in the reading room. The chair is still warm. The book is waiting. And at exactly 2:17 a.m., he hears the scratching and someone whispering his name again and again and again. There's a library in a small New England town that locals still describe as timeless. Built in 1893, its stone walls and stained glass windows have survived 2 fires, 1 renovation, and generations of quiet whispers. It's the kind of place where time folds in on itself, where the air always smells like old pages and something fainter. Years ago, a graduate student named Darren was hired part-time to help archive materials in the reference wing, dusty encyclopedias, brittle newspapers, and government documents no one touched anymore. The reference wing was rarely visited. It felt forgotten, like a limb the building itself had grown tired of using. Darren wasn't superstitious, but he had rules. Never stay past midnight. Never turn off both rows of lights at once. and never sit in the carols near the western wall. Something about the air back there always felt wrong, heavy, stagnant. One night, close to closing, Darren was reorganizing a section on 18th century folklore. As he reached to adjust a tilted spine, something odd caught his eye. A thin, cloth-bound volume wedged tightly between two oversized atlases. It had no title, no call number, no label, just dusty black fabric, so faded it looked gray in the low light. The library's catalog didn't show anything missing or misplaced. Curious, he slid the book out and immediately regretted it. The moment he touched the cover, the lights overhead flickered, just slightly, enough to notice. He chalked it up to old wiring. But the weight of the book was wrong. Heavy, but not in the way books should be. It felt dense, compressed, like it was resisting being opened. He sat at the nearest table and flipped it open. The first few pages were blank, off-white, crinkled but completely untouched. Then came the writing. Not printed, handwritten, tight, slanted cursive in dark red ink. The entries didn't have a structure. No chapters, no dates. Just paragraphs. Dozens of them. The first read. I saw her again tonight. Same spot by the third-floor stacks. Her hands were red. Not blood, something thicker. The second. He said the book found him. But he couldn't sleep without hearing the sound of its spine cracking open in the dark. Darren turned the pages faster now. Entry after entry. Each one more unnerving. As if dozens of different voices were writing through the same hand. The writing changed in pressure and tone, sometimes calm, sometimes frantic, even shaking across the page like it had been written in a panic. And then he saw it. To the one reading this now. Stop. Put it back. It knows. He paused, looked up. The library felt colder. Not just drafty, colder. The kind of cold that sinks into your jaw and fingers. He tried to laugh it off, but when he turned the page, his own name was there. Darren. Shelf 801B, alone again. He thinks no one sees him reading it. He froze. There was no way this was a prank. No one knew he was working that night, and he hadn't told anyone he was reorganizing 801B. His breathing became shallow. His skin felt clammy. He slammed the book shut, and the lights turned off. Not flickered, off. Every bulb in the reference wing went dark in an instant, but the exit lights remained. A deep red glow spilled over the shelves like blood through gauze. Darren stood slowly, clutching the book. He didn't remember deciding to hold it, but his fingers were locked around it like they were fused. From somewhere in the rows, deep in the western section, he heard a page turn. Not the sound of falling book or a bump. Just a dry, deliberate page turn, followed by breathing. Slow, raspy, shallow, and it was getting closer. He didn't wait. He ran, the book still clutched under one arm, and didn't stop until he was out in the main hall. The lights there were still on. The warmth returned almost immediately. The air wasn't heavy. Everything felt normal, except for the book. When he looked down, it was gone. He didn't remember dropping it. He hadn't set it down, but his hands were empty. No sign of the volume. He turned back toward the reference wing, but it was pitch black. Silent, as if the section had been drained of life entirely. The next day, Darren returned with the head librarian and another assistant. He tried to show them the exact shelf, but the books were all different. No atlases, no folklore section, no shelf 801B. According to the librarian, the numbering ended at 790. Always had. And when he tried to search the catalog, nothing. No blank book, no handwritten entries, no record of anything that matched what he saw. But the real horror came 2 weeks later. He was working the front desk when a woman returned a book. Said she'd found it in her car, but didn't remember checking it out. When Darren looked down, his blood turned to ice. It was the book. Still no label. No author. Just that faded black cloth. He opened it to the first page. This time, there was only one line written. You brought me back, but you've already read too far. He shut it and quietly slipped it into the return bin. Later that evening, he went back to check on it. The bin was empty. The book was gone again. Since then, every few months, someone reports finding a strange book in the library. Sometimes it shows up in the children's section. Sometimes in local history. Always shelved in the wrong place. Always unlabeled. And always with a new entry, written in red ink. No two entries are alike. But one phrase keeps appearing across the years, in different handwriting, in different voices. It doesn't want to be found, but it always is. No one's ever officially cataloged it. No one knows where it disappears to between sightings. But those who've read from it remember strange dreams. Hallways that shouldn't exist. Doors where there were none. A cold that stays in your lungs for days. They say the book chooses the reader, that it writes itself using their fears, their names, their pasts, but only once, because the second time someone opens it, their entry is the last. The internship wasn't glamorous, but for Jeremy, it was a step in the right direction. Cataloging, organizing, digitizing, quiet, steady work tucked away in the archives of a century-old university library. He liked the solitude, the silence between the shelves, and something about the smell of aging paper and forgotten ink felt grounding. The library's lower archives were technically off-limits to most students. Even interns needed clearance. But Jeremy was trusted. He showed up on time. He didn't ask questions. Until the day he found the key. It was in a small manila envelope, buried in the drawer of a rusted metal desk deep in sublevel B. The envelope wasn't labeled. Just a key, black, old-fashioned, its teeth uneven like it had been filed by hand. Taped underneath was a slip of faded paper that read only. Zzz. Jeremy blinked. He knew the library only had 2 basement levels, A and B. There was no Z. He asked his supervisor the next day, casually like it was nothing. "Hey, is there a level Z in the building? Like below B?" The man chuckled without looking up. "Level Z? Never heard of it. Sounds like an urban legend." He left it at that. But that night, something gnawed at him. Back in sublevel B the next evening, Jeremy found himself staring at the south wall near the mechanical archives. It was lined with old file cabinets, huge, metal beasts nobody had touched in decades. But something was off. There was a seam in the wall. Subtle, but it ran vertically like a hidden doorframe. He stepped closer and ran his fingers along the edge. A tiny keyhole. The black key slid in smoothly. Clicked. The door cracked open with a hiss of stale air, revealing a steep concrete stairwell descending into total darkness. No sign, no light switch, just the scent of mildew and something older, like the inside of a sealed tomb. His phone light barely touched the walls. The steps went down farther than made sense. 30, 40, 50. By the time he reached the bottom, he was at least 4 floors beneath sublevel B. The corridor stretched ahead, narrow and low-ceilinged. Water dripped from unseen pipes. The walls weren't finished concrete like the upper floors. They were stone, uneven, as if carved, not built. Jeremy passed empty shelves, old metal carts with rotted wheels, and then, finally, a door. Wooden, heavy, with a brass placard bolted into it. Z. Restricted materials. His breath caught. This wasn't on any blueprint. He was sure of it. He took a step closer, and the temperature dropped. Not just cool, freezing. His breath puffed in front of him. And there was a smell now. Not mildew, not rot, something worse. He opened the door. Inside was a single long room. Books lined the walls, all bound in cracked leather with no titles. No markings, just spines. The air inside buzzed with something electric, something that made his skin crawl. One book sat on a pedestal in the center of the room. Unlike the others, this one had writing. Handwritten, faded red ink that looked like it had been scrawled under pressure. The title read, Witness Log Z, Staff Use Only. Jeremy turned the first page. Entry 1, April 2nd, 1904. We are to catalog and store materials deemed volatile by the faculty. No reading. No removed. Entry is to be logged. Doors must remain locked. Entry 2, May 18th, 1904. I warned them about the third shelf. The whispers continue at night. Mr. Aldridge no longer speaks, only stares at the corner, muttering backwards. Entry 3, June 3rd, 1904. Do not respond to knocks from inside the shelves. There should be no one there. If you hear your name, do not reply. Jeremy stopped. He scanned the room again. Those were just stories. Old records. Superstition, right? But then, there it was. A soft knock. behind the shelves. He froze. Another knock. Closer. And then his name. Whispered. Softly. From somewhere behind the walls. Jeremy. He bolted. Back through the corridor. Up the stairs. He didn't stop until he was out of sublevel B, heart pounding, skin ice cold. He didn't say anything to anyone. But the next day, the envelope with the key was gone. So was the drawer it had been in. The whole desk, missing like it had never existed. He checked the blueprints. No level Z. No restricted room. Nothing past sublevel B. He even checked the maintenance reports. Nothing beyond what was public. But something stuck in his mind. The book. Witnesh Lulchet. He began to dig through the library's oldest records, especially from the early 1900s. Most have been lost in a minor fire. But not all. He found a scanned report from 1905. A disciplinary memo. Mr. Aldridge has been formally dismissed from the archival division due to erratic behavior and repeated violations of containment protocol in Section Z. The sublevel is to be sealed indefinitely. There was again. Section Z. Not a rumor. Not a myth. A real place that someone had gone to great lengths to erase. That night, Jeremy returned. He had to know more. Had to see if it was still there. But when he reached sublevel B, something was different. The wall was seamless. No door. No siam. No que llore. Like the hidden stairwell had never existed. But as he stood there, staring at the spot where it once had been, the light above him flickered. And from the other side of the wall, just faintly, he heard his name again. Jeremy. This time, the voice was closer. And it wasn't alone. It started with a routine return. A battered hardcover dropped into the return bin one rainy Monday morning at the Elmswood Public Library. The book was Ghosts of the Appalachian Trail, a title the head librarian, Dana Weller, immediately recognized. Not because it was popular, but because it had been missing. For nearly 18 years. According to the library's system, it had been checked out in the summer of 2007 by a man named Charles Keene, a quiet, middle-aged patron who'd come in every week like clockwork, mostly browsing nonfiction. Keene stopped visiting that same summer. No call. No explanación. Just gone. Dana had long assumed the man moved or simply forgot to return the book. But now, in 2025, the book had found its way back. It was warped from moisture, its edges browned like toast. The barcode was faded. But what struck her immediately was the note, wedged between pages 187 and 188. The paper was yellowed, folded 3 times, and smelled faintly of tobacco. In shaky block letters, it read, "I paid in full. Now you will too." There was no signature. Dana wasn't new to pranks. Kids scribbling on margins, teens returning books with weird notes. But this didn't feel like that. She flipped to the back of the book, hoping for a receipt or maybe a clue. But instead, she found a second slip of paper taped to the inside cover. It was an old library due date card, the kind phased out over a decade ago. Only one stamp date. Due. August 13th, 2007. Underneath it, written in red ink, not stamped, handwritten, was a second line. Received, never. That's when the lights flickered. The overhead fluorescence buzzed, dimmed, and returned to full brightness in the span of a second. Dana glanced around. She was alone at the returns desk. A Tuesday morning before opening. Just her, the book, and that uneasy weight in her chest. Out of habit, she scanned the book. The computer flashed, account closed. Deceased. Deceased. She froze. The system was synced with the county obituaries, and in certain cases, it auto-marked users as inactive if a death was confirmed. A few keystrokes later, she pulled up the record. Charles Keene. Died August 13th, 2007. The exact due date. She stared at the screen, then at the book. Returned 18 years after his death. She pushed back from the desk, her palms sweaty. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe someone else returned it. But who would hold onto a library book for nearly 2 decades, then sneak it in with a death note? Later that day, she showed the note to Martin, the circulation manager. He chuckled, called it creepy but cool, and joked that maybe Charles was trying to clear his record from beyond the grave. Dana didn't laugh. That night, she dreamt she was shelving books in the Appalachian history section. In her dream, The aisle stretched impossibly long, the fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead like strobes. She turned to leave, but found every exit replaced with more shelves. And someone was following her. Not running, just always a few steps behind. She never saw them, but she heard the soft sound of shoes on carpet. When she woke up, she was drenched in sweat. She chalked it up to stress. Maybe the note got under her skin more than she admitted. But when she returned to work, something had changed. The book was gone. She checked the desk, the bin, even the archival cards. Nothing. Martin hadn't touched it. No one else even knew it had been returned. The security footage showed Dana placing the book on her desk, and then hours of static. Just during that window. Only that camera. Later, the library's internal system logged something strange. An automatic hold request was placed on that same title. Not by a patron, but by an unknown internal user. The IP address was blank. The hold slip printed itself at 3:07 a.m., when the building was locked and empty. The slip read, "Hold for Keen Charles. Location, Reading Room 3. Reading Room 3 hadn't existed in years. That wing was closed for renovations in 2012 and sealed off completely after water damage. Dana, against her better judgment, walked there that afternoon. The old hallway smelled of mold and silence. At the door to Reading Room 3, she paused. The glass panel was frosted, but she could see movement. Shadows shifting behind the door. Something pacing. She didn't open it. She turned around and left. The next day, her inbox had a single unread message. No sender. No subject. Just a blank email with one attachment. A scan of the same note she'd found in the book. I paid in full. Now you will too. That afternoon, a patron named Aaron Ellis came to the desk with a question about Appalachian folklore. Dana pulled up the catalog and found one matching title. She froze. Ghosts of the Appalachian Trail was available again. Its barcode had changed. Its catalog number had changed. But the title, the author, even the faded cover, all the same. She checked it out for him in silence. That night, she watched the security feed remotely. Aaron sat alone at one of the carols, reading, page after page, hour after hour. At exactly 9:13 p.m., he stood abruptly and walked off screen. But he never left the building. The cameras showed no exit, no front doors opening, no cars pulling out. The book was found the next morning on the table, closed. And inside was a new note. 2 down, 11 to go. Dana resigned the next day. The library sent a replacement librarian to cover her duties. He lasted 1 week. On his last shift, he left a voicemail on the answering machine. Low, panicked whispering. I saw him. He asked if I was returning anything. He smiled like he already knew the answer. The tape ends with the sound of pages turning. Loud, deliberate. No one ever found the book again. But every few months, a new title mysteriously appears in the system. Always nonfiction. Always under local history, always cataloged by an anonymous user. And every time, the same note prints automatically. Hold request, do not fulfill. They don't cancel the holds anymore. They just wait and count down. They called it the Card Crypt. That's what the staff at Harper's Hollow Library had come to nickname the old index catalog room in the sub-basement. Long forgotten ever since everything was digitized in the early 2000s. The drawers still sat there, thousands of them, filled with yellowed cards in brittle handwriting. The room always felt too cold, even in summer. The fluorescent lights flickered like they resented being turned on. Julian never believed in superstition. He was an archivist hired to digitize the oldest, most obscure parts of the library's catalog. He'd worked in government buildings that smelled like mold and sadness. He'd combed through Civil War diaries and post-mortem photography without flinching. But there was something about Harper's Hollow Library that bothered him in a way he couldn't articulate. Maybe it was how the sub-basement always seemed 1 degree too quiet. How the elevator skipped the level unless you knew the manual override. How none of the staff ever volunteered to go down with him. They always smiled politely and said, "That room gives me a headache," or "I think the Wi-Fi cuts out down there." Julian had been at it for 3 days when he found it. He was organizing cards alphabetically, pulling drawers from the fiction general section. His job was to scan each card, match it to a digital entry, and flag anything that wasn't already in the system. He liked the monotony until the drawer labeled D-Fi stuck halfway. Not jammed, not warped, just resisting. With a little extra pressure, it slid open. But inside, there was only one card. One single, off-white index card with handwriting that didn't match the others. It read, "You're next. Shelf 13. No title, no author, no Dewey Decimal Code, no barcode." Just that message, in ink that looked faded and smudged, like it had bled into the card years ago. At first, Julian assumed it was a prank. A leftover Halloween joke, maybe, but something about it unnerved him. The handwriting was neat, measured, too calm. He checked the shelf layout map. There was a shelf 13. Fiction section, northwest corner of the top floor. Oddly enough, it was an older wooden shelf, not replaced during the last renovation. Julian climbed the narrow stairs from the basement and made his way toward the shelf. A few patrons milled about the library, but no one was in that corner. Shelf 13 sat by the far wall, nestled in a shadowy alcove between two stained glass windows that barely let in light. It was taller than the others. Older, too. Every book on it looked untouched. Cracked spines, faded dust jackets, a thick coating of dust over the top shelf. He examined the titles. Nothing unusual at first. Then, halfway down, he noticed a space between two books, a space where a book should be. The edges of the surrounding books were clean, as if someone had removed something recently. On instinct, Julian reached into the gap. His fingers touched wood, and then something cold. Another card, just like the one in the drawer. But this one read, "Do not look behind you." Julian froze. He hadn't heard anyone approach. But suddenly, the silence felt wrong. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something waiting. His breath caught. He turned. Nothing. Just rows of books. But as he turned back to the shelf, a third card was now resting between books. He hadn't seen it there before. It read, "You've been seen." Julian left the shelf in silence. His pulse was pounding, but he told himself it was probably someone messing with him. Maybe one of the library staff knew about his project and decided to have a little fun. But the next day, when he returned to the card crypt, something had changed. The drawer that held the first card, it was gone. Not the card, the entire drawer. There was no evidence it had ever been part of the cabinet at all. The metal rails ended abruptly, as if the drawer had never existed. And on the table where he'd left the scanner, there was a fourth card. Shelf 13. Lower row. Third book from the right. Julian knew he shouldn't, but part of him needed to know. This time, it was darker. The lights on the third floor buzzed quietly. The patrons were gone. Rain began to patter on the stained glass windows. He knelt before shelf 13. Lower row. He counted 1, 2, 3. A leather-bound book. No title. No markings. Just cracked, dry leather that smelled of mildew and rot. He opened it. The pages were blank. Every one of them. Except the very last. There in the same ink, same handwriting, was a drawing. It was a hand pointing, specifically a single finger. The index finger. Underneath, for words. "Don't archive this one." He slammed the book shut and backed away. The hallway felt longer now. The corners darker. He didn't tell anyone. But that night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hand. That pointing finger. In his dreams, it wasn't a drawing anymore. It moved. It beckoned. 3 nights later, Julian quit. No explanation. He left all his equipment behind and never picked up his final paycheck. Months passed. The library director eventually hired a new archivist. She lasted a week. On her last day, she reported something strange. One of the drawers in the basement catalog had a card with her name on it. No barcode, no author, no date, just a single line scrawled in neat, faded ink. Shelf 13 is waiting. It was never officially labeled haunted. No incident reports, no red flags in the university's maintenance logs, not even whispers among the staff. Just an oddly consistent pattern that only made itself known when you paid close enough attention. Study Corel 6B, tucked away in the far right corner of the 4th floor of the Halberd Library, looked like any other small desk enclosed by thin wooden walls. A worn-out chair, a brass lamp, outdated electrical outlets. On the surface, it was just another private nook for students needing silence. But for some reason, nobody ever stayed there for more than a day. The university denied complaints. The janitorial staff just shrugged. Even the IT department, which monitored the building's network usage, claimed nothing unusual. But something was wrong. It started with Corey, a sophomore linguistics major who preferred quiet corners. The library was packed during finals week, and study Corel 6B was the only available seat. He settled in, plugged in his laptop, and stayed for nearly 8 hours. That night, he had a dream. Not a nightmare at first, just unsettling. He was seated at a desk, though it wasn't quite the one he'd studied at. This one was older, narrower, made of some deep reddish wood, almost black in certain lighting. A single book sat in front of him, closed. No title, no author. His hands were folded neatly on top of it, as if waiting for something. He couldn't move, couldn't turn his head. He could only stare at the book. From the edges of his vision, shadows pressed in long, stretching shadows that never quite took shape. He could hear breathing behind him, slow, steady, and not his own. When he woke up, he was drenched in sweat, heart pounding. He dismissed it as exam stress. But the next night, the dream returned. Same desk, same book, same frozen posture. Except this time, the book was slightly open. Corey stopped using that Corel the next day. What he didn't know was that another student, Marissa, had chosen Corel 6B the evening after he left it. She never spoke to Corey, had no connection to him. She simply needed a quiet place to cram for an anthropology midterm. That night, she too dreamed of the desk, of the book, of something just out of sight, always behind her. Each time the dream returned, the book would open wider. She began to dread sleeping. By the 5th night, she saw her own name written inside the book, scrawled across the page like a signature in blood, though there was no color, just black and white. Her name, dated the day she sat at 6B. When she woke up, she vomited. Not from illness. Marissa said it was like her body rejected something she hadn't consciously consumed. She transferred campuses the following week. Over time, the university IT logs showed a pattern. Dozens of students used Study Corel 6B, but none for more than one session. Many never logged back into the library's Wi-Fi again. Some, like Corey, quietly dropped out. Others, like Marissa, relocated without explanation. A few even left cryptic posts on obscure online forums. Don't fall asleep after 6B. The book writes back. It's not a dream if it bleeds. One thread mentioned a grad student named Eli Chun who had been compiling testimonies about the Corel. According to the post, he'd been obsessed with the space for months, claiming it was some kind of psychic echo point, like a hotspot for residual trauma. He theorized that the desk didn't haunt you in a traditional sense. Instead, it listened. It absorbed stress, fear, guilt, anything the sitter carried into it. And when you fell asleep that night, it reflected that energy back, amplified, filtered through a lens you couldn't recognize until it was too late. No one knows what happened to Eli. His apartment lease expired mid-semester. He never turned in his thesis. His university email was deactivated quietly, without notice. But someone, maybe a janitor, maybe another student, posted a photo a few weeks later. It showed the interior wall of Corel 6B, carved with deep, uneven letters. I finished reading the book. Now it's writing me. The university painted over it within 24 hours. Today, Corel 6B is still there. No warnings, no locked doors, no restricted access. Just another study spot hidden behind the shelves. But if you sit there long enough, past midnight, when the building hum fades and the silence deepens, you might feel a shift, a stillness too heavy for an empty space. You might notice the book, not in front of you, but in your mind, waiting. Cover closed, pages blank. And when you sleep, you'll find yourself at the desk again. And this time, the book will have your name on it. Already written, already opened, already too late. They always say libraries are reflections of the people who use them. but no one ever considers what might be reflecting them back. It started subtly, as these things often do. A misfiled book here. A chair moved ever so slightly there. Small, forgettable anomalies. Nothing you'd report. Nothing that would make you question your own sanity. Not at first. Clara worked the late shift at the Ashbridge Public Library. It was the kind of job you took when you wanted quiet. Predictable hours, dim lights, and the comforting scent of old paper. She loved the routine. Closing up, res-tacking books, running the nightly system backups. She was the last to leave most nights, the building silent except for the soft hum of computers and the occasional clatter of a misaligned printer. The library had been built in the 1930s, back when grand architecture was seen as a gift to the community. Marble floors, tall arched windows, and, most distinctively, a massive wall-length mirror behind the front desk. Visitors always remarked on it. The way it seemed to shimmer slightly, even when the air was still. The way it didn't quite reflect the ceiling lights the same way every time. Clara never paid it much attention until the Tuesday after the time change. At 9:47 p.m., as she was shutting down the circulation system, the motion sensors tripped in the east wing. That was odd. The sensors weren't particularly sensitive. You had to walk directly under them to trigger a reading. She assumed it was a bird or a glitch. She checked the cameras anyway. On monitor 3, just for a second, she saw movement behind the main desk. Someone was standing where she had just been not 2 minutes ago. Same posture, same bun, same cardigan. At first, she thought it was a loop, a lag recording of herself. But something was off. The figure's head remained perfectly still while the rest of its body moved slightly, jittering, almost vibrating. And then it tilted its head, slowly, too slowly, to face the camera. Clara blinked. The feed cut to black. She rebooted the system. All cameras reset. Nothing on screen. The timestamp had jumped back to 9:43 p.m. She figured it was a glitch, static, maybe electromagnetic interference. She laughed it off, but her hands didn't stop shaking until she was halfway home. The next night, she came in early to check the camera archives. All footage from the night before missing. Every file timestamp between 9 o'clock and 10 p.m. corrupted. It wasn't the first time that had happened, according to the system log. The same thing had occurred once every 2 months, going back 3 years. The same hour. Every time. She mentioned it to Sarah, the daytime assistant. "Oh yeah," Sarah said, not even looking up from her computer. "That old mirror by the desk? Some say it's original, imported from a church that burned down in 1908. One of those weird architectural salvage projects. Supposed to be valuable. Or cursed. Depends who you ask." Clara didn't believe in curses, but she did believe in patterns. On Thursday, she stayed late again. This time, she kept the lights low. She left the monitors running, and she stood directly in front of the mirror. For 3 full minutes, nothing happened. Then, the lights above the stacks flickered. Just once. The temperature dropped. She felt it in her fingertips first. The sensation of air moving, but no breeze. And then she noticed it. Her reflection wasn't breathing. Clara took a step back. Her reflection did not. She lifted her left hand. The figure did not move. Then slowly, deliberately, it raised its right hand instead. It was mirroring her incorrectly. She turned and ran. Back to the monitors. The feed was fine, no corruption this time. But when she rewound the footage frame by frame, something made her stomach turn. At exactly 9:44 p.m., her reflection stepped out of sync with her body. Not metaphorically, literally. For 5 frames, it moved independently. Not as a shadow, not as a trick of light, but as a second figure behind the glass. She contacted the city tech office. They reviewed the footage. Their response? Data anomaly. Possibly a double exposure. But Clara knew better. You can't have a double exposure on a digital feed. By the following week, she started seeing the reflection in other places. The chrome on the library card. The polished elevator doors. Once, in the dark screen of her turned-off phone. Each time, the reflection was just slightly delayed, and its smile just a little too wide. Clara began documenting the incidents. She created a log, time, location, temperature, camera angle. And in doing so, she found something chilling. The reflection only appeared when she was alone, never when someone else was present, never during daylight, and always near the mirror. One night, she covered the mirror with an old linen drop cloth. The next morning, it was torn in half. From the inside, it wasn't until a coworker asked her why she was limping that she realized what had happened. There was a fresh gash on her ankle. Small, clean, almost surgical, but she hadn't injured herself. Later, when she reviewed the overnight footage, the reflection was gone. But at 2:17 a.m., a single frame of static appeared, followed by an image, too blurry to identify clearly, but unmistakably not her. A face, pressed against the other side of the glass. Its features were smeared like melted wax. But the eyes were exact replicas of hers, staring, unblinking, like they had been watching for a long time. The footage self-deleted the next day. Clara put in her notice a week later. She never explained why, just walked out one evening and never returned. Ashbridge Library now closes 2 hours earlier than before. The mirror is still there, still uncovered, still reflecting things that don't quite match the real world. Sometimes the night staff swear they see someone else shelving books in the reflection. Someone who isn't on duty. Someone who only appears when no one's looking directly at the glass. But if you ask the current employees about Clara, they'll pause, confused, and say, "There's no one by that name on staff." And if you check the employee photo board by the front desk, you might notice something even stranger. There's an extra face in the corner of the mirror, just faint enough to be missed, just clear enough to resemble someone you've seen before, maybe even yourself. They're watching from everywhere. Subscribe before it's too late. And tell me, where are you watching from? There's something unnerving about small-town libraries. Maybe it's the silence that seems too still. Maybe it's how time feels like it halts the moment you step inside. But in the case of the Roseville Public Library, the horror didn't begin with silence. It began with numbers. It was a rainy Monday when Janet Keller, the senior librarian, first noticed something odd. In a dusty returns bin, usually filled with a mundane mix of local history guides, young adult novels, and gardening manuals, there were 7 books that all shared one thing in common. They were all filed under the same Dewey Decimal number, 133.1. For most people, that number doesn't mean much. But for librarians, it's well known. 133.1 is the classification for occultism, books on spiritualism, divination, and paranormal phenomena. Janet didn't think too hard about it at first. Maybe some patron had gone through a phase, checked them all out together, and was simply returning them. Still, something tugged at her. The way the books were stacked in the bin, too neatly, almost deliberately. She scanned the return slips. The names didn't match. In fact, none of the books had checkout records from the past month, or the past year. That night, she stayed late to audit the digital catalog. Each of the 7 books had last been checked out 5 years ago, all by different patrons. All had been listed as missing for years. The books had simply reappeared. She pulled one off the cart. Whispers Between the Veil, an introduction to seance practices. Inside the back cover, someone had scribbled something in pencil, barely visible. Beneath the shelves, beneath the stone. 133.1 will lead you home. She blinked. The handwriting was faint, but not faded. It looked fresh. The next morning, she called in sick. But she didn't stay home. Instead, she went down to the town's historical archives, tucked inside the oldest wing of the municipal building. A retired curator, Mr. Elbridge, remembered her from her undergrad days. When she asked if there was anything in the town's history relating to the number 133.1, he didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He turned pale. Elbridge stood silently for a moment before pulling a small wooden box from the locked drawer behind his desk. Inside was a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings, most of them from the 1940s. The headlines were strange. Second child missing in 4 weeks. Town council covers up disappearances. Local man claims library basement holds other room. But one article stood out, clipped, underlined in red, and dated March 13th, 1949. Occultist Society suspected in disappearances, evidence found among library archives. The story claimed that a secret group, calling themselves the Order of the 13th Shelf, had used the town library as a meeting place. Rumors had long swirled of hidden rooms beneath the building. Rooms accessible only through a precise sequence, through books, codes, and markings filed under one specific Dewey number. 133.1. Janet returned to the library just before closing, heart pounding, throat dry. There were whispers about a basement level no longer in use. A trapdoor hidden beneath one of the oldest shelving units, Section 13A, which housed books related to mythology and folklore. The section had been cordoned off for renovations for months, yet no renovations had occurred. The shelves remained covered in a tarp, untouched. Janet waited until the library emptied. She turned off the main lights, but left the emergency ones on, casting long, eerie shadows between the aisles. She stepped behind the barrier, lifted the tarp, and ran her fingers across the old wood flooring. There, a faint outline, square-shaped, a hidden panel. She pried it open with the claw of an old shelving hook. Below was a stone staircase, steep and narrow, descending into darkness. The air grew colder the deeper she went. The stairwell ended in a chamber barely tall enough to stand in. Old filing cabinets, rotted wooden chairs, and a mold-stained altar stood in the center. On the wall, carved in jagged, precise lettering, was a list of numbers. 133.1, the gate. 133.2, the voice. 133.3, the offering. 133.4, the silence. 133.5, the return. Each line was followed by a name. The last line, written in red, newer than the others, read 133.6, the librarian. Janet Keller. She dropped the flashlight. In the darkness, something whispered her name. Over the next few days, things at Rosevale Library began to shift. The patrons noticed first. Lights flickering in Section 13A. Cold spots in the reading rooms. Books returning themselves overnight. Always from the same genre. Always to the same shelf. One by one, the other librarians left. Claimed the place felt wrong. One complained of dreams, staircases that led nowhere, voices that whispered from book spines. But Janet stayed. Her voice became softer, her footsteps slower, her presence dimmer. She rarely spoke to anyone anymore, except when she was shelving. Only books from 133.1. 6 months later, a temp worker was assigned to Rosevale during the winter staffing shortage. On her second day, she noticed Janet standing motionless by the occult shelf, a book in hand. When she approached, Janet didn't move, just whispered. Every number opens a door, but some doors never close. Then she handed the temp a book. It wasn't in the catalog. It wasn't published. No author. No barcode. Just a title embossed in flaking gold. The Dewey Code, Volume 2. The temp left the job by that weekend. No one has seen Janet since. But every month, the library logs another strange return. Books long thought lost. Always with the same classification. 133.1. Sometimes, inside the back covers, a message is scrawled in pencil. Most recently, it read, Shelf 13 is growing, and it remembers your name. There was only one library in the town of Elders Hollow. A modest stone building set at the edge of the woods, quiet and half-forgotten, like most of the people who visited it. The kind of place where time didn't move in hours, but in dust. You could smell the age before you even walked through the door. Binding glue, yellowed pages, and something faintly metallic. On a cold Tuesday morning in October, Miss Ellen Rourke unlocked the library like she had every day for the past 23 years. She turned on the lights, booted up the old catalog computer, and checked the book drop-in. Only 2 returns. A travel guide from 1998 and a slim leather-bound novel that made her pause. It had no barcode, no return date stamped, no slip inside. But that wasn't the strange part. What made Ellen's breath catch in her throat was the name scrawled in blocky, fading ink on the inside cover. Property of Marvin Dean. Ellen stared at the name for a long time. Marvin Dean had been a regular at the Elders Hollow Library for most of his life. a soft-spoken man who came in rain or shine, always reading histories of ancient civilizations, always checking out only one book at a time. He died 5 years ago. Ellen had gone to his funeral. She remembered it clearly. His casket was closed. At first, she thought maybe someone donated the book or it was part of the estate. But they hadn't received donations in months. And besides, the return bin was emptied just the day before. She logged into the catalog and typed in Marvin's name. No records appeared. Then, just out of curiosity, she checked the log of recent returns. There it was. Returned, the ancient astral rituals of the forgotten world. Patron, Marvin Dean. Time, 3:03 a.m. There were numbered 24-hour return slots. The bin was outside, sure, but the timestamp showed it had been scanned in. Not dropped. Scanned. The system showed the book was checked in by staff ID 0000. That code didn't exist. Ellen felt her skin go cold. She glanced over at the security monitor above the main desk, an old, grainy black and white feed that recorded the overnight hours. Her hands trembled as she queued up the footage from 3 a.m. The timestamp ticked forward. 3:02. 3:03. Movement. A shape walked into frame from the west-facing aisle. No sound, but the figure moved slowly, steadily, like it knew exactly where it was going. She leaned closer. It was a man. He wore an old coat. Thin, bony frame. Head down. He walked up to the desk, placed the book on the scanner, and paused. Even in the dim resolution, Ellen recognized the profile. The jawline. The thinning hair. She watched herself reach for the rewind button with trembling fingers. Again, frame by frame. And then, at 3 hours, 4 minutes, and 13 seconds, the man turned toward the camera. Just for a second. And smiled. It was Marvin Dean. Ellen slammed the monitor off and backed away from the desk like the screen had burned her. The next day, she called in a technician to check the system. He said the log files for that night were corrupted, and the footage she had seen no longer existed. She didn't argue. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. But 3 days later, it happened again. Another book in the return bin. No Barkov. No Sleep. This time, it was the Book of Sleepwalkers by an author she didn't recognize. Inside was a name. Sarah Kimball. Ellen felt her throat tighten. Sarah Kimball had died in 2009. Suicide. She'd been a quiet, withdrawn teenager who used to spend hours in the poetry section. Ellen had been the last person to see her alive. The catalog confirmed it again. Returned at 3:03 a.m. by patron Sarah Kimball. No footage this time. The security system had mysteriously powered off between 2:57 and 3:05. The pattern continued for a full week. Every other night, a book appeared in the return bin, each one linked to someone who had died years earlier, all of them former library patrons. People Ellen remembered. Each book had no listing in the catalog, no author, no publisher, and each bore a strange symbol on the back cover, a small, circular engraving that looked like an Ouroboros, but with thorns. Ellen tried to photocopy it once. The image came out completely black. By the 7th night, she stopped looking at the returns. She left them in the bin, untouched, but the catalog still recorded them. Always at 3:03 a.m. Always with names of the dead. She tried contacting the regional library network, but they brushed her off. Said the Elders Hollow location was long overdue for technological inconsistencies. They'd schedule a technician. They never did. Ellen began sleeping with the lights on. Then one night the return bin was empty. She thought maybe it was over. But at 3:03 a.m., the library lights turned on by themselves. No power surge. No storm. The lights simply flickered on. And then her home phone rang. She hadn't heard that phone ring in years. She answered, hands shaking. On the other end, there was static, and beneath it, breathing. Then a voice, quiet, raspy, familiar. Ellen, you haven't returned your book. Click. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in her kitchen, lights blazing, clutching the last returned book to her chest. She flipped through the pages. Most were blank. But one was not. Page 13, written in precise black ink. The library never forgets its debts. That Sunday, Ellen drove to the edge of town and threw all the books into the river. She quit her job the next day, but the catalog kept updating. Somehow, and at exactly 3:03 a.m. every night, a new title still appears, each bearing the name of someone long since buried. Until last week. Last week, the catalog listed a return by a patron who is still alive. At least for now. The name? Ellen Rourke. No one has seen her since. It started with an error. A simple one, the kind of glitch every librarian has seen 100 times. The system showed a hold request for a book titled The Eyes Beneath Us. No author, no ISBN, no catalog number, just the title, stamped in bold in the system with a date and time of request, 2:03 a.m. Ellen, the evening supervisor at Fairhaven Public Library, noticed it during her routine check of next-day requests. She figured it was a mistake, maybe a misclick or corrupted entry. She deleted it, wrote a quick note to IT, and forgot about it. Until the next night, when it appeared again. Same title, same time, 2:03 nachts. This time, it was under a different patron's name. She blinked at the screen. Maybe they were searching for the same obscure title, but the odds were strange. There was still no author, no shelving location, no database record of the book ever existing. The next day, the patron showed up, an elderly man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He seemed confused when she mentioned the hold, claimed he never put in the request. He hadn't even used the catalog computer in over a year. He left without checking anything out. But as Ellen cleared his record, the system glitched again. The title reappeared, queued under a new name. That night, she couldn't sleep. The third time it happened, she took screenshots. It was 2:03 a.m. again on the dot. The request came from a patron who hadn't had an active library card since 1996. She cross-checked. The man had died in 1999. She called IT, did a deep dive. No evidence of hacking. No signs of any physical request being submitted. And no digital fingerprint on how the hold was even being placed. There was no origin. No trace. The system had simply created it. After a week, the staff stopped trying to delete it. Every time someone removed the request, it came back. Always at 2:03 a.m. Always under a new name, some familiar, some not. Then came the phone calls. Patrons started calling in, asking about the book, describing it, saying they had received pickup emails from the library, even though no such emails had been sent. One caller whispered that they'd seen the book in a dream. It has no title on the spine, he said, only on the inside cover. Handwritten. It smells like salt and iron, like something dead. Another patron, a teenage girl, returned a stack of books and quietly asked if the library had a back room where strange titles were kept. When pressed, she went pale and said she had dreamt of a stairwell behind the returns bin, one that spiraled down, impossibly deep, with rows of shelves that hummed in the dark. The janitor found her sitting motionless in the children's section one morning, staring at an empty chair across from her. She didn't speak again. After that, Ellen requested the building's floor plan from the city archives. There was no basement, no sublevels, no unused stairways. But when she walked past the old returns room that evening, she noticed something off, a faint draft coming from the floorboards. She pressed her hand to the seam and felt cool air rising. Beneath her palm, the wood felt soft, almost like skin. She pulled away. She stopped staying after closing. But the system didn't stop. The hold requests became more frequent. 2 per night, then 5, then 10. They stopped coming only at 2:03. Now they trickled in at random times, 2:12, 3:19, 4:06, all hours of the night. Sometimes in clusters. The title never changed. The Eyes Beneath Us. One night, a part-time page named Calvin attempted to fulfill the request. He thought it was a prank. The system said the book was in transit, but no one had checked it in. No one had ever seen it. Still, the entry showed, available for pickup, Shelf B3. There was no Shelf B3. But when Calvin went to the back stacks to prove it, he found a small metal card, covered in dust. One book on top. No barcode. No markings. Only the title written inside the cover, in cramped, wet ink. He brought it to the front desk, chuckling nervously. "I think I found it," he said. The moment he put the book down, every light in the building flickered off. Not out, off, like a switch had been flipped. Complete, deliberate darkness. And in that second of silence, just before the emergency lights kicked in, Ellen heard something else. A soft breath, just behind her. She turned. No one there. Calvin never came back to work. When they tried calling, his number was disconnected. His locker still held his coat, his half-eaten lunch, his earbuds. His shoes were left by the side door. Security footage showed him walking into the staff room, then nothing. The recording glitched. 17 minutes of static. Then silence. That day, a memo went out. Do not attempt to fulfill hold requests for the title, The Eyes Beneath Us. If this title appears in the system, do not interact. Immediately report to the branch manager. Do not retrieve. Do not search. Do not speak the title aloud. Ellen swore she never wrote that memo. But every staff computer had it open the next morning, time-stamped 2:03 a.m. The library board authorized a full wipe of the catalog system. They brought in a third-party security firm, cleaned all the drives, set up a brand-new digital system. The first night after launch, the hold requests were gone. For 3 days. On the fourth night, it returned. This time, the request wasn't for a book. It was for a person. Hold request. Ellen Marks. Pickup location. Unknown. Status. Processing. Eta. 2:03 nachts. She moved to a new city that week. She doesn't work in libraries anymore. But sometimes when she dreams, she's back in the Fairhaven stacks. She walks past the microfiche reels, through the locked staff corridor, and down the stairwell that shouldn't exist, where the air smells like iron and paper rot. And down there, beneath shelf B3, the book is waiting for her, still on hold. It started in a small town in Vermont, a place so quiet that most people didn't even lock their doors. The library sat in the center of town like a spine, everything else built around it. A brick building with ivy creeping up its sides and a tall arched window that always caught the last light of the day. Librarian Marie Dorr had worked there for over 2 decades. She loved the order of it, the silence, the smell of old paper, the feeling that knowledge slept in every corner. But one Thursday morning in late October, something odd happened. When Marie opened the return slot, she found an envelope inside. No book, just an envelope. No stump, no name, just a single phrase written on it in flowing black ink. Final overdue notice. Marie chuckled at first. She figured it was a prank, maybe a student trying to be clever. Inside the envelope was a slip of parchment that felt old, brittle at the edges, like it didn't belong in this century. And typed, on an actual typewriter, not printed, were the words, Patron, Georges Wendel. Item, the hollow hymnal. Due date, October 31st, 1896. Penalty, collection initiated. Do not ignore. George Wendell. The name tugged at something in Marie's memory. She flipped through the library's oldest ledgers, and there it was. Wendell, George T. Checked out a single book in 1896. The Hollow Hymnal. The title wasn't familiar, but the checkout entry was marked in red ink. Never returned. The last note in the ledger beside his name simply said, vanished. Still, Marie thought it had to be a hoax. The library had been updated and modernized years ago. Books were scanned with barcodes now. Who even knew about those ledgers? But over the next week, more envelopes arrived. One addressed to a patron named Evelyn Carr, who died in the 1970s. Another addressed to Tommy Bierk, a local boy who drowned in 1954. Each envelope the same. Black ink, yellowed parchment, the title, The Hollow Hymnal, and the same final line. Penalty. Collection initiated. Do not ignore. Marie began to feel a presence in the stacks. A whisper behind her when she was certain she was alone. The old grandfather clock in the back corner, long broken, began to chime at 3:03 a.m., even when no one was there. But she didn't tell anyone. Not yet. It was when she received the 4th envelope that her silence broke. This one was addressed to Marie Dorr. The same handwriting, the same cursed title, same due date, October 31st, 1896. Only one difference. The penalty line had changed. Penalty, overdue. Subject to retrieval. Do not run. Marie didn't sleep that night. She searched the entire library for the hollow hymnal. Even the hidden archives in the basement, where old tomes from the 1800s were stored. Dust as thick as felt, air dry as bone. But there was no record of the book itself. Only the repeated references to it being overdue and then lost. By the second night, her dreams changed. She heard chanting, hollow voices echoing in languages she didn't recognize. A melody played over and over. A hymn, but wrong. Dissonant, as if sung backward. She dreamed of a room with no doors. Just bookshelves, towering, endless, packed with rotting pages. And in the center, a chair. Facing away from her. Something sat in it, unmoving. She couldn't see its face, but it was humming. When she woke, she had a paper cut across her palm, blood on her bedsheets, and an envelope on her pillow. Subject, Marie Dorr. Second notice. You were warned. Return is now mandatory. Late returns will be processed in the stacks. She reported it to the town police. They laughed, until the chief himself found one in his mailbox the next morning. Patron, Officer Harold Jennings. Item, the hollow hymnal. Due, never borrowed. Penalty, witness to interference. Collection authorized. Within days, the library became a ghost town. No one wanted to go near it. Parents kept their kids home from the nearby school. A silence fell over the town like a funeral shroud. That Halloween night, Marie stayed in the library. She brought candles, salt, a cross, whatever she could find that felt protective. She didn't open the doors. But at 3:03 a.m., the clock chimed again. Not once, 13 times. And then the shelves moved. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just a creak, an inch at a time, as if something was crawling out from the very bones of the building. She heard the hymn again, that warped melody, coming from the history section. She should have run. Instead, she followed it. The sound led her to a section of the wall that looked solid, until she touched it. It was cold, vet, and it gave way like flesh. Behind it was a stairwell, stone, spiraling downward. The last entry in her journal, later found on the circulation desk, read, "There's no light down here. Just shelves. Shelves forever. They move when I look away. I think this is the real library. The one underneath." Marie was never seen again. But the notices didn't stop. Now they arrive across the country. Sometimes slipped between junk mail. Sometimes laid perfectly on a doorstep. No return address. Always the same words. Final overdue notice. Book, the hollow hymnal. Penalty, collection in progress. And the most disturbing part? Some recipients say they never even borrowed the book. Some don't even remember reading. But once you get the notice, it doesn't matter. Because it remembers you. And it always collects. They're watching from everywhere. Subscribe before it's too late. And tell me, where are you watching from?